I'm Adam Jennings, and this is Awaiting Approval, a podcast about the messy human side of creative leadership. Today I'm joined by Dr. Chris Arnold, thought architect and social impact strategist, former creative director and board director of Saatchi Saatchi, and many more, for a relaxed two-way conversation about his journey, the lessons he's learned, and what it takes to lead with creativity and honesty. Chris, hi, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Sounds like it's going to be good fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. Same questions I've asked everybody so far to start us off and for people to get to know a bit more about you. If we were recording this in person today, where would you suggest we meet and what would you order to drink?
Oh, that's an interesting one, actually. Where would I order? I tend to like quite unusual surroundings. There's a very good art gallery down in Islington. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's really eclectic. We used to go there a lot for inspiration when we had offices in the Angel. And you go upstairs, there's a ramshackle old building. You get outside, suddenly you get to this amazing sort of cafe upstairs, and it's just so incredible. There's another place which actually, in Oslo, we went to, and we were over there. I was doing some talks about marketing. And there's an old abandoned building that's turned into a sort of artist hub. And we went there, and it's just amazing wandering between all these rooms. And it's really inspirational. When I came back, I said, "Oh, we've been there." Everyone went, "You went there? Wasn't it dangerous?" I said, "No, it's full of artists." So I do that. And what would I drink? Well, usually I'm a bit of a tea man myself. I don't really drink alcohol hardly ever. So yeah, I probably have a nice cup of tea.
Very good. Well, I'll raise a metaphorical cuppa to you to cheers you on, and we'll get stuck straight into it. When was the last time you used pen and paper?
I use it well because I'm dyslexic. I have to use it all the time because I constantly have things I have to remember. So I keep a post-it note with me all the time, and I have these post-it notes, and I stick the post-it notes together in big chains. Then they sort of go up the wall, and that sort of reminds me. And then I have to remember to actually look at the damn things. So it's just that I think it's because being dyslexic, you kind of create a strategy for how do you actually remember things and order things. And when I'm juggling a lot of things, I have to find post-it notes great. So yes, I use it a lot. Pen and paper.
I love that coping mechanism. And because I'm ADHD, so I find a new coping mechanism every Monday, because by the next time Monday comes around, that coping mechanism will have ceased to have existed in my purview, and I will need to find something else. Do you suffer with the same thing, or do you find
I'm
it sticks a bit longer?
Middle ground ADHD, middle ground dyslexia, and high performance in both. So I do have this awful memory problem, which I forget things. And I literally can be, I'm reading an email, then I open a Word document, I can't even remember what the hell it was I was going to write. It's that bad. Because I'm ADHD, as you know, we're hugely impulsive. So we're doing something, suddenly we have an idea, and next thing we're into writing this sort of 20-page document and phoning people up, and within an hour you've kind of got it half happening, and then tomorrow you have to actually pick it up because to the next idea. So impulsiveness is something I have to put up with. It's going to be very good. I've done a lot of things thanks to impulsiveness, but also we talk very fast, which is not best for podcasting. But the dyslexia is, for me, it's a combination of creativity, which I think is fantastic, but it does have that problem of memory, and the memory is a bit that really grinds for me sometimes. I've created a lot of coping strategies for organization. Because at the moment I'm in the middle of organising one of UK's biggest community arts festival, and there's really only two of us doing it. 60 venues, over 200 performers. It's a lot of coordination. But what you do is, because you have to really think about how to structure it, you work out structures to do it. And it was the same when I'm being creative director. You have to work out structures to manage the processes of the job you're doing. You've got to find ways of doing it. And I think when you're neurodiverse, I think what we do is we develop those things. And that's why I think we tend to be very more strategic. I think this strategy comes of us trying to find ways of solving problems and doing things.
Comes out of a sort of survival mode, really.
Yeah. Coping as well. School, let's be honest, at school, if you don't particularly like reading from a book, you find lots of ways of getting out of it. And masking as well. A lot of people use techniques to mask what they're getting. The good thing is that we are more open about neurodiversity now and less judgmental. Probably the downside of it is there's less need to be strategic. So maybe the next generation of neurodiverse people are not going to be as creative and as strategic as we are. Who knows? Because it's very prevalent in the advertising and marketing industry, in the creative industries. Dyslexia is massively prevalent.
That's an interesting take, and I would love to see if there's already sort of data or studies into how, if that trend is emerging and how that's going. Maybe we're a little bit too soon into the changes that you're talking about. Memory loss is one that I absolutely resonate with. I will, if I'm with a group of people and I'm making a round of teas or coffees, I'll ask them how they like it. By the time it's got to about the third person, I've forgotten what the first person has said.
Yeah.
I could never be a waiter or anything like that. I
No,
would never
that's fine.
remember
I
anything.
used to work at a greengrocer when I was at school. And it was a woman comes in, oh, can I have a pound of apples, pound of oranges? And after about 3 things, I go back and say, and she said, can I just write that down? So what are you know, I've only asked for 6 things. And I would never take the order for the bar. No way, because I'd get to the bar and go, I have no idea what. It's called the memory shelf, actually. There's a lovely diagram that was drawn where it's like the shelf, you put 1 thing on it, 2 things, and 3, and suddenly you get to the 4th and it all collapses in a heap.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's what they call memory. So most people have a memory of about 6 to 8. Autistic people have incredible memories. I mean, they could be like 20. But certainly for ADHD and dyslexics, our memory shelves tend to be pretty short. You know, and my wife's on his face as well. I go to, and I'm at an event. You know, you chatted to someone, you go to the toilet and come back. I cannot remember who I was talking to. What a
Right.
chance in hell.
And that's so frustrating, isn't it? Because it's not through disinterest, and it's not through not trying either. It's just gone like that. I think my memory shelf, to use your analogy, is made of balsa wood and hung up with sticky tape because it does not last very long.
No, I think it's very interesting because when you explore the aspects of neurodiversity related to creativity, I think there are basically 3 pathways that are quite significant. One is the strategy to cope, the coping mechanism that we come up with through school and all that. And that makes us very strategic, makes us, we always have to think ahead. I think the second one is that it does actually, because our brains are wired differently. We are dimensional thinkers. Therefore, we think in a more dimensional way. We can connect the dots. And it's a bit like, thinking in 3D. And then the third one is actually it changes your life experience a bit because I wasn't very, I'm intelligent, but I'm not an academic. So I didn't go down that route. I went into doing art. I went into doing subjects that I knew I could cope with and do. And therefore, it's not surprising a lot of creatives end up in the art field, because it's also, if you think about advertising, for example, I never looked at anybody's CV when I hired them. I'm not even interested. I'll say now I've hired well over 200 creatives. I don't think I've ever looked at the CV once. I always say to the headhunters, just send me the book. This is what I want. I want the book that surprises me. And if I look at the book, I think it's great, then I'll ask them a few questions, more out of politeness. But I really don't care if they come from a fancy agency or a crap agency. I don't care if literally they've done an art course or not. If the book's good, it's good. Yeah. And what I found was ironic. I know we're probably going off subject here. But at one point at Creative Orchestra, almost every single person in my creative department was dyslexic. And so when we formed our business advisory group, which is called the the Garage Innovation Lab, which came before John Hegarty's garage, by the way, we put most of the dyslexic strategic thinkers in that, and they were really good. And we advertised for more dyslexics. We decided to do a job ad with Steve Jobs in. So it was a real jobs ad. And we said, only people like Steve Jobs should apply. Because we just wanted dyslexic people. And what was interesting is we got a kind of positive and negative backlash. Some people saying, you can't discriminate. And some say, well, yes, you can. Actually, it's legal to discriminate in that way. But the ad became very famous. And then now apparently someone said in America, whenever someone talks about dyslexia and jobs, that ad appears on every slide deck. So it made its mark. We had 1,000 people apply. But I generally believe that, dyslexics are hugely creative, so do ADHD. But when you look at autism, it's a very different set of skills. But boy, have they got amazing memories. Their pattern recognition is much superior to ours, and they can just put things together in a different way. I've worked with quite a few autistic people through Dyversity Lab, and it is really interesting how we look at the problems from different angles. But when you put it together, it's extraordinary.
My partner is autistic, and I see the dot connect thing, but I also see the creativity as well. Like as you say, like the different approaches from the different strands of neurodiversity. It's fascinating to see, and I know I have learned so much from her and how she approaches things and how she dot connects and puts things together and what she shares with me in terms of her insights. That has taught me so much in terms of how to think differently, because I think as you say, like as you go through childhood, especially our age where there wasn't as much support, there wasn't as much understanding at school, and so you have to figure it out yourself. Yeah. And so
usually bashed over the head for being crap and useless and stupid, and your mother going, "What's wrong with you? Why are you so dumb?"
But you kind of get entrenched in the coping mechanisms that you put in place that work, and then you stick to them. It's much like often people stick with the same haircut that they've had when they were 20 because that was the first one.
Is that the haircut you had, mate?
Probably.
I tell you what, the thing I read the other day was very interesting. It was about leadership, and someone had analysed people who are neurodiverse because they've got something like, a very high number of people in leadership are neurodiverse. 35% of millionaires, for example, are self-made millionaires. And what they discovered was that one of the characteristics of these leaders was their ability to delegate, because they knew they couldn't do something very well. The first thing was to delegate it. And I learned that lesson really, really early on. If I'm not very good at it, I delegate. And I think that ability to delegate apparently is a very important ability to drive you to the top in terms of running businesses and stuff. But as you know, as a creative director, the ability to know who to give the task to, who's best at doing that task, don't try and do what you can't do. You've got a team of people who'll do it for you. Just do what you're really good at. And I think also the combination of vision, which we tend to have as dyslexics and ADHD, the ability to see a bigger picture, also helps us to be natural creative directors. Because usually, if it had to be an academic form we had to fill out for HR, we'd never get the jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes perfect sense and resonates. I would love to take a hard sort of swerve from this topic and come to your career. And if you could give us a sort of just a bullet point from where your first job in the creative industries through to your first CD position, and then from there to where you are today.
Well, I guess it all starts really at school, because what I realized at school was, people are saying, well, you're very intelligent, but you're not doing very well academically. And I failed my English exams and I had to redo them. But I then went into sixth form. And initially, I wanted to be an architect. And so I found I had a natural bent, obviously, towards creativity and stuff. So I did very well. I was actually very good at maths, and I also did economics, which is a subject that fascinated me. So when I left college, I went on to Hornsey College of Art, which is really just Middlesex Polytechnic in the old building that used to be Hornsey College of Art. Now, I actually only live, 10 minutes away from that building now, live in Crouch End. And ironically, I'm actually doing a talk on the history of Hornsey College of Art in a couple of weeks' time, because it was famous for its revolution of the 1968, when, it was a time of revolution. They had a 6-week sit-in and everything. And we went to this college. It was like, yeah, this is the rebels. We're the rebels and all that. We're great. And I think it was written on the wall. It says something like, "There is no such thing as normal here." And I thought it was great. This was the place where not being normal was a normal.
Oh.
And you're really encouraged to sort of be yourself. And I felt there was no judgmentalism. There was nobody saying, "Why are you failing? Why are you bad?" I have 2 brothers, and my parents used to say all the time, "What's wrong with you?" Yeah, it was the classic growing up syndrome of many neurodiverse people. But for me, it just worked. I was really good at what I did. I was good in art college. I was very good at my subjects, got very good results, went on to Kingston Polytechnic and didn't know what to do. So I ended up getting thrown into an interior design class, which was because I'd originally wanted to be an architect, which I kind of liked, but it wasn't me. And I struggled through for 3 years. And really, I spent most of my time involved in politics. I did sort of try to recreate the 1968 sit-in of Crouch End, Colsey College of Art at Kingston Polytechnic. I nearly got thrown out. They failed me, and I said another year. And during that next year, I had time to reflect. So I spent a lot of time playing guitar, which is my passion. And I started music groups, and I played with other bands and sessions and everything like that. So I didn't have to do a lot of work. Just spent most of the time intimidating the guy who failed me. And my brother, meanwhile, had come to the poly to actually he'd done psychology, so he was now doing a course in marketing. Now my dad had been in sales and marketing. And initially, I hadn't been interested, but my brother said, "Have you thought about the creative side of it? Advertising." I go, "What? But advertising is rubbish." And he said, "Now let me show you good advertising." When I saw good advertising, I went, "This is amazing." He said, "Well, you'll like this because it combines your desire for strategy, for doing something different, your impulsiveness." And so I did a couple of D&AD courses and landed myself a job quite quickly. McCann's, working for the very legendary Don White. And Don White was the Liberace of advertising. Long gone, but he was so flamboyant, and he was an incredible showman, and he was a great, lovely guy to work with. He camped up his campness, and he was very overt. He kind of changed the industry from that level. He was the first guy to really come out and say it's okay to be gay. And at the same time, I was just literally getting married and starting to have a family. And McCann's was, again, it was quite, I was put in a group and it just didn't work for me at all. The group head was a complete jerk. And we had a few fights and I got fired, and they do say in advertising, you've got to get fired, made redundant, walk out, done all of this. And then I got picked up by a wonderful guy called Reg Starkey, who was, again, a legendary copywriter at the time, along with Tim Delaney. And he'd got a small agency and he picked me up and he taught me so much. Taught me a lot. It was like a whole college course in a year and a half. Everything you need to know about advertising, creativity, and everything. And then he then actually got me a job at a bigger agency. And then I sort of trucked through different agencies and ended up at an agency called Alliance International, which is a really good agency, actually. And our job was to win awards. And I teamed up with a guy called Toby Talbot, who went on to do very well in Asia. And we did very well together. And we'd won quite a few awards, just sort of started accumulating awards for our sort of work. And one thing we used to do, actually, which I think is key to how we used to do our work, is we put the ideas on the board and invite people to come along and talk about them and discuss them and say what did they like the most. So we were very conscious it wasn't how we thought, it's what others thought. And so people would come into your office and say, so what have you done this week? And they go, oh, I like that, I like that. And I picked it up from Mad Dogs and Englishmen. Decided you give them some stickers and they stick the stickers on the ones they like the most. And that really worked really well. And that sort of helped us be less sort of arrogant and less cocky, which I think a lot of creators were. And then they said to us, look, we want to make you deputy creative directors. Yeah, okay. Do we get more money? And then we sort of just it sort of crept onto that, and then eventually the executive creative director left, and we became the creative director. So we merged with another agency, and we suddenly found ourselves back to being deputy creatives with a guy called Max Henry, Lang Henry. Jennifer Lang was great; she's ex-artist. That didn't work out very well, and we ended up at HK McCann's, which was McCann's new super creative unit, and they basically brought us in as creative directors. We had an executive creative director. I fell out with him as well. Ended up with a punch up and got fired. I'm not sure if I got fired or I walked out. I can't remember now. But it was I probably would have thrown a typewriter out the window if I had the time. But it was one of those things. But it was a bit cliche. And actually, I then ended up landing a job at Saatchi's, and that was really where it took off because it was a great place to be. And I certainly had this title as Saatchi Saatchi creative director, but I was actually running a division. With a lot more power and control, and I could do lots of stuff. We did a load of really great creative work, and then it sort of went on from there around different agencies. And then I came back to Saatchi's, and Dave Droger offered me the job as creative director. So it was just John and I running the creative department basically between us, and that was big because it was a massive operation. You've got a lot of people under you. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of demands, and we were doing above the line and the below the line, and John was just doing above the line, and so I had a lot of weight on me. But it was great fun, but it got too political in the end. And so after a couple of years, I thought I wanted to start my own agency. So I left and started an agency called Feel. That was a learning curve. There's no thing. I start my agency, have romantic ideas. It doesn't work like that. You're working every bloody hour, and you're trying to think, where's the money going to come from? So we then sort of, I had a lot more control of where I wanted the destiny to be. And Phil was a really original agency because it was the first of the real ethical agencies, but it was also a hugely creative boutique. And we had great fun doing stuff. And we do quite a lot of pro bono. We weren't interested in the money. We were just interested in doing great work. And my partners were always saying, what about the money? I go, yeah, I'll come. But we had some real moments of crisis. And then actually, interesting enough, we merged with Ron Legas's agency. Ron Legas has on Legas Delaney and his following agency. And Ron was a legend of the industry and a former managing director of Saatchi Saatchi. And he'd come and started mentoring me. And it was like, wow, this guy's just like God. And then he said, I'd like you to come and merge with us and be the new creative director. I was like, what? And it's just like God inviting you to be Gabriel. And so we merged and formed Black. And that was, for a couple of years, that was fantastic. We did some, again, really great work, really enjoyed it. But then politics, as people find when they run agencies, politics is the thing that kills agencies more than anything. It's not cash flow, it's politics. And then we broke away. And then I formed Creative Orchestra with my wife. And we were actually sitting in Warsaw, sorry, Krakow, actually, in Poland. And we were sitting in a cafe. And we were kind of in gardening leave at the time. Which for those who don't know means basically you're not allowed to do anything, but you get paid to be out of the circuit for a while. And we said, wouldn't it be interesting just because we're reading about these architects in San Francisco who just were bringing lots of different creatives in. We said, what if we did that for advertising? What if we treated ourselves as architects? So really our job was to be the architect, not the builder, not the surveyor, not the engineers, but the architect. So we built the whole concept around architecture which is what I really want to do. Hence why I use the word thought architect. And what if we then built this thing around the idea that we were more the idea generators? Now, Nick Cohen did this for Mad Dogs and Englishmen in New York, and it was really effective. And I'd met him a couple of times, and I thought he was a very inspirational guy, actually, genius. One of the great unsung heroes of the industry. And so we said, okay, so we went back to London, and we found this building, which is an old slaughterhouse in Islington. and for a sort of peanut rent. And we had very little money, very little equipment, but we decided we'd just start up, and we invited loads and loads of young creatives to come and join us for a bit of a see how it went. It's an experiment. We had about 28 people in this room from every creative background you can imagine. Everybody just came to do this big experiment. It's like a real sort of art house experiment. And we called it Creative Orchestra because it was an orchestra of creatives. And we got a load of publicity because we started off as a not-for-profit. I'm not driven by money. So for me, it didn't matter. I just figure it comes if you do great work. And suddenly within the year, we'd picked up work. We'd taken work off of IKEA. We had Total Greek Yoga. We had King of Shays. We had some work for Sainsbury's, working for Heineken. We'd won a load of work for Diageo. Yeah, like the first year was like, where did all this come from? And it's because we had an attitude, and that attitude was really about doing things differently. And we'd put people on projects, and while we were getting people to work on it, we'd also study the different methodologies they've been taught, how they were taught. We realized there are some very different methodologies of how creatives approach projects, whether they see them as problem solution or NLP, you look for the outcome, or whether you're looking at them as a progressive, which is what advertising does. We started sort of modeling these new ways of writing briefs. We had 4 different briefs that modeled 4 different methodologies of creativity. And although it was a bit chaotic, it was amazing because this drove whole new creative. We decided not to enter awards and just do great work. And I think we had fantastic fun with some really unusual stuff, really wild and wacky. But what actually happens after a while is that the clients shape you, you don't shape the clients. And we started picking out more and more work, and more of the work was coming, just driving us into a kind of a box where we were thinking, hang on, we're getting more conventional and more conventional. And we started losing a lot of the creative people we liked that were unusual and replacing with more conventional. So suddenly you end up with a department full of advertising people, and then the pandemic came along, and that was a time for us to sort of reshape. By this time now, I was moving much more into the areas of around ESG, which is around social impact and about how you integrate with communities and society and people, and how you could be spending your money doing stuff that's more worthy, that works just as effectively as advertising. And also we moved much more to strategy. So we said, well, actually, you don't make any money in execution anymore. So let's just work on strategy, which is better paid, and you get in and out. So that's what we've been basically for a long while. We still do quite a lot of executional work. We do quite a lot of branding work. We do a lot of, do ads and stuff. But we find the strategy and the thinking bit is a bit that's often the weakest out there. There's a lot of agencies out there. I think, as I say, you don't ask the architect to build the building, but you don't ask the builder to do the architecture. And unfortunately, I think the ad industry is full of builders doing the architecture, and we've lost a lot of the architects. And I think what we need is more architects. And I think clients need to see that. You get an architect for the idea, get a surveyor and engineer to make sure it's robust, and then get the builders to deliver it. I think if we could break the industry into the same structures as the building industry, I think actually it'd be a good way of kickstarting the industry, because at the moment it's being massacred by AI.
And that's a good point. I mean, when you say this, first of all, there's an amazing career history, and there's so many bullet points I want to come back and visit. So I will try, with my memory shelf intact still at the moment, to remember those. But before we do, that's a good point you raise. And one of the things that I've been thinking about with the emergence of AI and the effect, both negative and positive, that is having across almost every industry, but especially the creative industries, is that idea of we still need human thought, and we still need human compassion, and we still need humanity at the core of everything. And so when you say about need those strategists, we need those architects, that sort of resonates to me. So what is your feeling about where the creative industries are going with this tech and the rate that it's changing?
Well, I think, there's 2 sides to this. I think there's a great quote that Bill Gates re-quoted from an educationist, which said basically, to sum it all up, rather, because I can't remember the word myself, very hard to remember quotes, was that any tool in the hands of a good thinker or a good person is better. You can take a self-playing electronic keyboard, and my son can press the buttons and it plays, music. But you get Rick Wakeman or a classic pianist at piano, and you're going to get something you're never going to hear. And AI is exactly the same. The danger is that we end up at the level of a self-playing keyboard as a standard for everything. We all know we can plug into AI, say, can you do me an image of this? And it'll produce an image, and it's usually horribly colorful, but it's actually quite well done, and it's not bad. And for a low level marketing, it's probably fine, and the public don't know the difference. But it creates a lower mediocrity level. And I think the thing about AI is A should really stand for the word average. I think Eleanor Crook, who's an artist who worked with Midjourney in them developing the platform, she said that the problem with AI, it has no eye. It cannot tell what's good or bad. And it's the same to be said, it has no ear. It doesn't know when a tune is good or bad. It just knows that that's familiar with pop. AI can produce great pop songs, but it can't produce anything that really knows if it's good or bad. And yes, by random, a million typewriters and a million monkeys, it can occasionally produce some amazing stuff. And AI has been around, since the first chess computers, if you think about it, and we've been using it for years. There's a great program called A Person of Interest, which was written in 2012, and I wrote an article about it the other week. It's gained a massive resurgence of interest because it's all about this AI computer. This is 2012. And it's all about this massive AI computer that knows everything and it can manipulate the world and the markets. And when you look at it, it was science fiction in 2012. Now it is pure fact.
Hi. If what you're hearing is resonating with you, where you are in your leadership journey right now, stay tuned until the end. I'll share details on how you can work directly with me to level up your creative leadership.
And a lot of people going back and watching this go, my God, AI is two-edged sword. In the hands of really good people, it's amazing. I can do good things with it. It's a bit like the Macintosh when it came along and killed off typography. But used by good typographers like Roger Kennedy, it could do amazing things. If you've got really smart, sharp people who know what they're doing, then you'll get good stuff. I still think that from a pure strategy point of view, AI really can't crack that at all. If you give, I'm looking at a brief this morning, reading it, it's an international brief, 14 countries, and I'm looking at there's no way I could crack that in a million years, at least not for another 20 years. So I think it's a double-edged sword, but the danger is economics. What are all the AI companies like Jasper selling themselves on? You don't need 5 copywriters, fire 4 of them, keep 1 by Jasper. And it does a very mediocrity level. But if your business is on doing mediocrity, then that's what you do. And let's be honest, a lot of marketing agencies are in the mediocrity area. A lot of clients want mediocrity. So there's a danger.
Do you think that idea of the sort of mediocre marketing, where is that coming from? Is that coming from us as consumers just getting used to it, and so we don't challenge that anymore? We're bombarded 24/7 with information on screens and in our ears and in our eyes from all different angles that we've got to a point where we just cannot discern good over bad.
They talk about Gen Zs. I don't agree with this definition that all kids in that age group are 15 years age group across the entire planet, all one group of mindset. They're rubbish. But there's definitely to see that everybody across the board is getting more and more stressed and more turned. And a lot of research has shown that it's because there's much more banging us. There's more information coming. It's not just advertising; it's in every sort. We're being completely. Someone's beautifully summed up. The world is always on. There is no off button anymore. There's no silent button. It's just on and it's full volume. And I think that is becoming stressful. And advertising is part of that. You look at the assault of advertising upon the people now. You go back 20 years, it probably would have been, you'd seen a good few ads in a day. Go about 50 years, you might have seen 1 or 2. Nowadays, it's just thrown at you from every angle. In fact, some platforms are almost impossible to use because there's just too much advertising. I go to my local ragmag, Ham and High, and it's almost impossible to read an article because it's just ad after ad after ad, none of which I'm interested in. I think advertising is trying harder to be heard in a louder environment. And someone beautifully summed up. Dave Trotter actually said this when we were talking at a festival. I was talking on the same bill as him and Rory Sutherland. And he said, would you want to be the player in the football team or would you want to be someone on the back row of the crowd? Which do you think gets most noticed? And he said, as an advertiser, I tell them that they should be on the football pitch. They should be one of those 12 players, not one of the 60 or 100,000 people. But most clients seem to end up in that. And he's right. You want to be noticed. And he says, he argued a great case. He said, if you put a TV ad in a break in England, you've got 6 ads in that break. You will not have an ad for a competitor because they don't do that here. And you will be noticed. But if you put it on the internet, it's so flooded, you don't get noticed. I think this is the challenge of advertising, is just there's so much noise and very little stands out anymore. And we're in competition with not ads anymore, we're in competitions with cat videos or Mr. Beast.
Or Mr. Beast's cat.
Yeah, Mr. Beast and his cat. Yeah, that's a winner. My son loves Mr. Beast. I love Mr. Beast. He's a very smart guy. So I give him a lot of respect.
When you went through your bullet point history, you mentioned about your brother saying to you, yeah, but there's good and bad adverts. And you also mentioned that your dad was in sales and marketing. So where did that discernment come from? And what was it, if you remember, that he showed you that was good, that really stuck with you?
Well, my dad was, I mean, his bent was slightly more PR, but he would say, one of the two things he told me is, firstly, you got to stand out. You know, there's no point just being with everybody else. You do something. So he was very good at, for example, PR stunts, fantastic at PR stunts. And to be honest, that's one thing I learned from him, because one thing we've done over the years is some pretty amazing PR stunts that have got a lot of publicity. I still even now recommend a good PR stunt to kickstart your campaign. So he was very good on that. And he taught me that to be a little bit more unusual is better than be usual. So he kind of encouraged me. My mother was an artist, so she was always pushing me to be a bit more different. I think my brother pointed out that when I said, "Oh, advertising," he said, "Yes, but you're only seeing the bad stuff." When he showed me the good stuff, he showed me that it wasn't just about it looked nice; it was the ideas that went in there. And when I realized there was a thing called an idea, then I clicked onto it very quickly, the difference between advertising. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of people still going on about this. John Hegarty, who's now 80, still preaching and still a guru of wisdom, still talks about the importance of an idea. You know, and I mean, I remember actually I was briefly at HCL, and then suddenly got to this bit of not having ideas anymore. And I thought that was like really crazy because it didn't work. You know, they'd sort of gone through a pitch of trying to be almost the alternative now was to not have the idea and be more graphic. It didn't work. And I think it's true that, you know, the idea is, which is a concept, by the way, which was originally created by Ron Ligas actually at Saatchi Saatchi, did you know? Because they were trying to work out how to sell creative work to clients who don't understand it. So they had a box and it had the big idea, and they sold the packaging. Ron's idea was they will buy the packaging, they don't need to buy the ingredients. You know, so you don't need to know how it works inside. You don't need to know how a clock works. You buy the clock. You don't need to know how the engine works. You buy the car. And he said, let's do the same with ideas and creativity. And they sold the idea, the big idea. And so people say, I've just got a really big idea, you know. So it was great. It's a great bit of marketing in its own sense. And I thought to realize that when you click into that big idea, you realize what it means, and you suddenly go, "Oh, that's really great. That's exciting." And once you can understand it, that's what you strive for. Otherwise, I see a lot of work out where there's no idea; it's just execution. You know, and pretty bad execution at it. There's still some good stuff around, but it's a lot of rubbish.
When you think about those history that you've had, all the different places that you've worked at, if there was one point in time that you could go back to yourself as you were then, but knowing what you know now, when would it be, and what would you say to yourself?
It's a very interesting one, that, because probably over the last 25 years, we've seen some pretty significant changes. I remember that when the birth of, a bit longer than 25 years actually, because probably 30 years now. I remember when digital was coming around, it was kind of the beginning of my career, and I was really, really wanting to get into that, but wasn't able to. And I really wish I had. I'd taken a career where I'd started above the line, I'd taken a period below the line, and in fact, a whole group of us, turned the below the line concept into something more positive, and people started to reevaluate below the line as much more creative. And I then looked at digital and said, that's what I want to do with digital, because digital at the time was shit. You know, early digital was really not very exciting. Although website design was amazing. If you look at a website book from 1999, nobody designs websites as original. It was a hugely creative period. Nowadays, it's all Wix, you know, WordPress. There is no creativity left in website design. But, you know, you go back to the early days of, you know, the late 90s and the early 21st century. There was the creativity in website design was just off the scale. I was showing some students this. I was doing a lecture at Bournemouth. I occasionally teach at the BA advertising course. And I was showing the website design concept from the early days, and they were just blown away. They couldn't believe how amazing this thinking was. They said, now it's all formulated boxes. And I think advertising is falling into the same mentality. Advertising is becoming very formulaic, very process. I think there's a lot of clients out there who just see it as a process. And there's less and less of people who really want to say, I want great ads. That will come back. It always does. It's always a cycle. You know, flares come in, flares go out, flares come in, flares. Tank tops, thankfully, never come back in fashion. But, you know, and I did see on the TV the other day, Bay City Rollers, and thought, thank God their fashion never came back in. Glam tartan or whatever they call it, you know. But I think that I would go probably back to the period of digital, because I would like to have got more involved with the early stage, more to change it. Because I think I would like to have pushed it in the other direction to where it went. Yeah, I was analyzed by psychologists saying you're an agent of change, which means you always want to change things. You always want to take things in new directions. I just don't have the capacity to sit there and do boring crap, you know, and follow a process, you know. Well, none of us who are ADHD and dyslexic follow processes.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often for us.
Dream on.
You were absolutely right, though, about the sort of web design in the 90s and how different it is to now. I remember that time of pure joy of sitting down with a new brief, open up Flash, and off you go. It was like what
Remember
could be
Flash?
done.
There's a dating term, isn't it? Flash,
I know, right?
like Quark Express, yeah.
Yeah, and I can remember looking at Rob Ford's FWA awards at the time and just poring over the entries and thinking, this is just like this is a library of goals. This is a library of inspiration. Um, and now, I mean, I'm a judge for them now. And when you look at the submissions, technically very, very competent. And
Yeah,
every now and again, there's a really original piece that comes through, but a lot, there's such a homogenous vibe across so many digital experiences now.
absolutely, yeah.
It, like you say, there's this information on a card, this information on another card, and then you click
Mm.
that and you get a third card, and it's all there. And I really hope that sort of combining two things that we're talking about here, if execution is handled by tools and that gives us more time to be thinkers, to be architects, maybe we can see that resurgence of innovation within design again. Do you think that's also potentially on the cards for advertising as well?
There's a lot of talk about the reinvention of advertising at the moment. Again, I've got the same experience about judging awards, and I got criticized by an award judge for saying you're not giving very high marks. I said, well, do you know what? I compare it to stuff that I was looking at 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and compared to that, it's average. So, but we're not 10, 20 years ago. I said, yeah, but there is a point here. The standards go down. There is that thing you think, oh yeah, we're just getting grumpy old men as you get older and older. As you get to your 40s and your 50s, you're thinking, am I just getting passe? Actually, when you look at it, and we say that the good example is the web stuff. You can show the web stuff now to young people, and they look and they go, "Fuck me, that's amazing." But you show them advertising from that period, they go, "Fuck me, that's amazing." I saw someone get very excited about an ambient media idea, and I said, "Well, actually." So I showed these students this one. This is what everyone's getting excited about. Can I show you 5 more that were done 10 years ago? And people go, "Wow, that's amazing. Where's it going? What's happening?" I think what happens with everything, we saw it with the film industry, we see it with theatre, we've seen it with music. There's a kind of wave that goes up and down. You go to the peak, you crash down to the bottom, you go to the peak. And if you've ever read Samuel Butler's Way of All Men, he talks about the cycle of rich and poor. About how one person will make the money and the next generation loses the money and the next generation makes the money. And I think that happens a lot. And people like Bob Hoffman, who's amazing, he talks a lot about that as well, that we need to reinvent the advertising industry. I think the danger is that some people want to kind of reinvent it the old way. My view is my model of the future is based on architecture. That's where I see the future coming. The isolation that you actually don't try and do everything. You just say, as a client, someone came to me the other day and said, I'm just looking for a company who can really do big ideas. I said, not many left, I'm afraid. But not wanting to necessarily do the execution. So we've got an in-house studio, we can do all that. We just want the big idea. And I think, that we do need to come back to that. I think what will happen is that it comes down to sales, doesn't it? If everything's very mediocre, sales are very mediocre. Someone showed me some data recently saying that the sales is worse now than it ever has been. The response rates are worse than it's ever been. Now, that is diluted by a lot of aspects of statistics to do with the fact that, for example, digital, I can put 1 million ads out and I can still get, 100 clients, but it's just because it's more mud against the wall. And even targeting isn't that effective. And they said, in fact, someone said that DM was better targeted 30 years ago than now. So I don't know. Maybe some of these figures are dodgy, some are maybe good. Either way, nobody's telling me that advertising is twice as effective as it was 10 years ago. So, evidence for that. So maybe we need to look for a new magic wand, and maybe that magic wand will come back to finally the big idea. Maybe it'll come to something else. The thing about advertising is that there was a period when creativity was on its own. There was no competition for creativity. It was the thing that made you stand out. Through the heyday of Saatchi Saatchi, it was like the big idea, the amazing creative. Nothing else can compete. Now we're competing with data. Now we're competing with a lot of other things. So clients think, I don't need creativity. I've got data. I don't need creativity. I've got AI. I don't need creativity. And so they don't think they need it, but they really do, because that's what makes you stand out.
I've often thought there is absolute huge undeniable benefit in having data that you can work with. That's fine. But it also feels like when you solely use data, you're in an echo chamber and it will only get more and more restrictive because the set of data you use has nothing new to grow on. And so it's all based on the older data, and it gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And I think in creative terms, we need to have this amazing idea. And yes, benchmark that against what's been before, benchmark that against the data you know, that's fine. But there's also gut instinct with people like you and I who know, have been there, have known and seen what does work and what doesn't work, and get a feel for it. It always amazes me when you look at the film industry, for example, which is very much now based on data, very much based on, well, this worked and audiences came and saw this, so we just need to make a copy of that. I'm generalizing, but that's sort of approach that is prevalent. But it's always amazed me when you see interviews with very, very well-known execs in the film industry, and they say, we had no idea if it would be a hit or not. Come on, you must have had some idea. You know, there are some indicators, and you must have had a feeling.
I wrote a presentation with my brother who was doing a conference on his planner. And we wrote a thing called Data Cluedo. And the idea was that you had to guess who the murderer was based on the data. And then by the time they were given all the data, we had to tell them, by the way, 2 of the bits of data are completely inaccurate. 1's corrupted. So you got 6 bits of information. You don't know which 2 are wrong. You know that 1's twisted and the other 3 might be right. So who's the murderer? And they all said, well, how are we supposed to know? I said, well, you're marketing directors. You make decisions based on data, but you never question the data you're getting, do you? And it's been used by quite a lot of people now as this idea of saying that the trouble with data is only as good as the origins of it, the source of it, the truth of it. And also when you're doing data through questioning, how good are the questions? I remember we were on the marketing week rang me up and said, look, we've got this data from a well-known data company about the fact that people, because of the recession, they're buying less ethically. And I read the article and said, yeah, that's what they were saying. It wasn't true at all. It was the interpretation of the 25-year-old handler who'd misinterpreted the data, hadn't got an idea about why things had changed. When I was able to look at it, I was able to see the truth of what the matter was, because that was my knowledge area around ethics. And so we went back and basically blew it apart. But this is a highly respectable company that you would happily trust. So I think data is a terrible thing that in the hands of the wrong people it can be abused, can be twisted. And yet you have to look at that data that says, for example, that young people want to vote right wing. Completely untrue. It was being completely twisted to suit one political party's agenda, and it's not true. You know, so data is. But I mean, we've always said intelligent creativity because we've always done a lot of research. We've always done a lot of looking at things and testing ideas out. I remember actually one very good example in the film industry or the TV industry was the Batman and Robin. When they first launched Batman and Robin, I think Star Trek fell into the same thing. Research showed they wouldn't be successful. They got that wrong, didn't they?
Yes.
You know, so just say, look at everybody says, Batman and Robin, Star Trek.
Love the idea of that data Cluedo, and because essentially that entire setup is any whodunit.
Yeah.
Right. There's the red herrings. There's the ones that are obviously throwing you off track, and so I love that. And it's a really potent way to bring that message home that there will always be some error. There will always be some, whether that's an error in the data itself or whether that's an error in interpretation or a bias in interpretation.
But that's where human judgment comes in, isn't it? You and I can look at something and we can intuitively know something isn't quite right. Is that doesn't resonate with me. You know, I've been dealing with consumers now for nearly 30 years. I kind of understand the psychology of it. I've studied all about the psychology of consumers. I understand the behaviors and the habits, and I work across different markets. So very quickly, something's telling me something. I'm going, that doesn't ring. That is not ringing. Yeah, it's a bell in my head going, that's ringing wrong, you know. And I've gone back to clients sometimes and had an argument with them saying, look, I don't know, but that does not feel right. I don't care what the data company. We had it with the launch of a competitor to Groupon, and the data coming from this company looked very good. But we all just sat there and said, we don't think this is right. We think it's complete bollocks. So we went and did our own data test on our own cost and came back with a different result and actually convinced the client that ours was right. And when we launched it, it was very successful. But I believe if we'd gone down the original company's direction, we would have just blown it completely.
And that's experience talking, right? Like that's trusting your gut instinct based and the data that you have from your year's worth of experience over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this comes back to the HI versus AI, isn't it? Yeah, human intelligence and instinct. Yeah, human instinct versus AI, average intelligence and no bloody instinct. You know.
And there's the quote for this episode.
Yeah.
When you think about all the pieces of work that you've done, you've mentioned a good few campaigns and a good few projects that you've worked on, but when you think about all of them, is there a piece of work that you're most proud of?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I've worked on massive, big campaigns, yeah, multi-million campaigns. I worked on literally peanut, budget campaigns. And I think one that I enjoyed most because there's two actually. Is one because someone said it won't work. And that's when we were at Saatchi's and we were doing it for National Asthma Campaign. We wanted to demonstrate how polluted London was. So the idea I had was we're going to paint the headline on a billboard in glue and over 2 weeks see how much pollution sticks to it. And firstly, the production guy said, "Oh, there's no such glue. You never find it." So I had to do the work. So I ended up ringing lots and lots of chemists up, and I really enjoyed that. It was like a sort of detective investigation. And I found this chemist at 3M who said, that's an interesting challenge. Give me a week, I'll come back. And he came back and he found this glue that was used in packaging. And they gave us the glue and they actually funded the poster. We got a guy to paint it all on, and it was absolutely amazing. And we did tests, and over the 2 weeks, all this pollution started sticking. But everyone had told us it can't work, can't be done. Now, this is Saatchi's where we used to have there is no such thing as impossible. I think it was the first time we actually proved it as well. Because most of the time it was like, yeah, just a slogan. And that also got D&AD and everything. So it won lots of awards, which was really nice. But what it did more significantly, and people talk about awards, and awards are nice. They're toys, basically. But what is really significant is how much did you change society? And for me, this really took me on the first journey of being more socially conscious and into ethics. Actually changed the regulations in London on pollution. Because when they saw that poster after 2 weeks, and National Asthma Campaign were very good at the PR, every politician said, shit, we've got to change things. It's like the stink of 1888, isn't it? It took an instant to make people go, bloody hell, we've got that much pollution? And it just changed everything. And it had a massive impact. So when I looked at the social impact of that campaign, it was one of the most dramatic because it absolutely changed the GLA's thing on pollution. It started to bring in the whole thing of ULEZ and all that. That all started from there, and it was part of a campaign where National Asthma had been banging on about 2 years and getting absolutely nowhere. And then we came in, did that one poster, and it was the trigger point, the tip over. The other one was I think I just enjoyed for the fun of it. We stuck a 21-foot condom on the Sir Nabis giant. And it was just great fun being, literally going up there at 5 a.m, and pegging this enormous condom on, thinking any second we might get arrested. I love all those kind of campaigns, where it's a naughty boys scrumping in the orchard bit. And that's what I think makes advertising fun. And we conceived the idea, we'd done tests, put it on, then we had an aeroplane that was flying over to take the picture. And while we were on the way back to London, we were phoning out radio stations in funny accents going, "We've just seen this and there was a condom on the server. It's giant." And it was a hoot all the way back. We had great fun. And when we were doing the idea, one of the marketing team at Family Planning Association, because it was for Condom Awareness Week, had said, and we did a lot of great work for Family Planning, said, what if you get arrested? And Anne, who was the head of the organization, said, "We have lawyers, don't we?" So she's very brave, and we did it, and it got so much publicity. It was in the Sun and everything, went all over the world. And she said, "I'm very happy. You're right. A good idea travels." Didn't need a headline. It just did the job for them. So yeah, those two I really like most. They weren't big budgets, but they made a difference.
And they're so beautifully simple. They're
Yeah.
the kind of, both of them are the kind of ideas that you go, "Oh, I wish I'd thought of that," which I think is always a great indicator of a great idea.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes they're fun, sometimes they're very serious. I think that, I do like doing fun stuff. I like curiosity, I like intrigue. I'm very much into psychology of it all. And I like to play with people, basically. So I do like playful, and probably play with people's minds. And for me, that's fun if you do it in a positive way. I mean, the dark side is, I did a course of propaganda when I was at art college. It is scary. But what you do is, having done that, you see so much of what's going on now with propaganda, how devious both corporations and governments and politicians are playing and the dirty tricks they do, which you see when you've got kids. As we've got kids, we're now being more protective about our kids, but you see some of the dirty enough stuff being done by, say, the technology companies. For example, the battle between smartphones. We don't want them as parents, and they want us to have them. And what's going on in those areas? And you're seeing a whole level of marketing which is very subversive and manipulative. And you see it with the gaming companies as well, the gambling companies. And as marketers, we recognize it, but most people don't see it. It's really scary. There are people out doing it. And the more obvious stuff is clickbait, which didn't exist 20 years ago, which is a masterful piece of crap, really. But hell, we all fall for it. Gotta see that.
I mean, talking of sort of the darker side and darker things, darker aspects, we've looked at campaigns you're proud of. Is there, I wouldn't say a failure, but is there a moment that was like an aha moment when something didn't go as planned?
There's a lot of those. I think, yeah. I mean, to be honest, it was actually, we worked for Malupa Baby Food, and it was just actually when I'd had my two older kids were babies, and therefore I had quite a lot of personal insight, and so I was hanging around with a lot of mums. I did what actually Paul, who started his own baby food company, did. He just went and talked to lots and lots of people, and so I talked to a lot of mums about this. So I started bouncing ideas off them. And we got to this point that a lot of people talk about their kids as little monsters in, characterful ways. And I came with this idea of saying, what if we got kids represented by the well-known authors that all these mums know and dads know? And as little monsters, but they're fun, they're tongue-in-cheek, is very nice. And so we got a load of illustrators to do those illustrations, and it was great. And we tested it, and it was all done in a very kind of empathetic, tongue-in-cheek way. And it just scored off the scale. The research came back and said, I don't think I've ever seen somebody score as well as this. It's got 100% thumb up. The mums absolutely love it. Even the dads love it. And then what happened was the Malupa had this new MD come in from Germany who was very linear thinking. Don't put linear people in front of advertising and marketing guys, never hire a linear mind in the marketing. Anyway, he comes in, he goes, what is all this stuff? Why are we doing these stupid things? I want a pack shot. And I'm not joking, he just turned into pack shots. And not surprisingly, sales crashed to the floor. And they got taken over by another company later. I can't remember who. And Nestle were laughing because they saw them as serious competition. And and that, I found that very depressing, because two things is, firstly, the guy was very close-minded, and the neurolinear people, which about 10% of people are very close. They don't see color; they just see black and white. They just see very linear. So it's dangerous when they get in that position. We had a client for a brief time at Renault, and he'd come from the accounts department. And because Renault's spend was so massive, they decided to put the head of accounts in charge of the advertising. And during that period, I think Renault did some of its worst advertising. We worked on some of it. It was just terrible. It's very important if the clients are wrong, if the CEO or MD puts the wrong person in, you are going to kill your business. Put creative people in charge, not narrow-minded people.
How do you, this is a good sort of point for those working their way up. How, when you're in that position, how do you help the client understand that they're going down the wrong path?
Well, I developed a thing when we were at Saatchi Saatchi years ago, where I suddenly realized I watched this program about a spy being flipped. And we were having this big problem that we'd done this economic analysis that said, if you sell the idea first time round, you make money. If you have to come back and redo it, you're going to break even. If you have to do it a third time, you're going to lose money. And this was a really serious problem, because advertising now was making less money. Advertising could be making big profits, 40%. Then went down to about 18%. I think WP is about 7.5% now. Is the margin on advertising. So it's you cannot afford to get it wrong. And so I said, well, so some people are saying, well, you just give the client what they want, then they'll be happy. I said, well, no, they're never happy when you give them what they want. So what if we can flip the client like we do a spy and change their mindset? So we developed this whole program about how to flip the clients and get them to think differently. And it was really effective. But it doesn't always work. And a lot of clients refuse to go down this pathway. So often you are stuck with clients that can be very narrow-minded. Sometimes it's fall back on good old-fashioned research, usually fixed, to sell the big idea. I think the one we used at HHCL was very simple. I go in and I present a really safe crap idea, right? And I pray to God the client doesn't buy it, but sometimes they do. But the point is, it makes the client feel safe. They think, good, you've listened to me, it's all good, I feel safe. So he's sitting comfortably. Then I say, I've got this idea, but it's a bit radical. I'm not sure you're going to like it. And of course, the curiosity will force him to tell you, show it to me, sure. So he looks at it and goes, whoa, God, that's a bit scary. Now, what you've done is you've moved the scale from safe to super scary. And then what you do is you share them an idea in between, and they must always buy. It's called the power of three. It's a very familiar technique, used a lot in retail. It's used by Apple for selling computers. And that was how we used to always sell. So occasionally the radical idea went through, but often we'd sell something a lot more creative. But occasionally the client will go back and they'll go back with a really exciting idea that you've sold them. And the next thing they do is they share everybody it and come back with a boring idea. Ford were like that every time. they'd go with the idea that said, the brief would say, tell everybody it's got a bigger engine. Okay, so you'd have an ad that says, the Ford Fiesta now has a bigger engine. Then you'd have some really great ads, and they'd end up with the ad that says, but that's the one that tells you it has a bigger engine. Yes, but nobody's going to look at it. So the car companies, I don't think understand creativity. But yeah, I think it's a challenge for clients. I mean, often now I put it in economic terms. I say, well, look, I'm going to be honest. If I was paying for this ad myself, I'd do that ad. That one, I know I'm going to lose money. So you take your choice, but don't tell me when your sales plummet that I did not warn you. So I try and put a high risk factor on it, because clients at the end of the day are risk averse. So you have to make buying shit high risk. At the moment, buying creativity is seen as high risk. So how do you flip that? And that's what I do in flip is, you turn the whole thing the other way around and get them to realize that the idea you think is good is actually the low risk one to do. Or I just get them to do research and say, let's test the 3 ideas. We had that with Total Greek Yogurt, and they've been doing really crappy ads, very typical cliche rubbish. And we came up with this campaign that was really radical with cartoons. We had a singing zebra singing a crazy song about fish. It's for yogurt. with this cow playing the piano, and the zebra was actually symbolic of a healthy cow, by the way. And then we had the spoonbill bird trying to get the yogurt pot, and it was just bizarre and the wackiest thing. We tested against a lot of really safe stuff, and the Greeks wanted to buy the safe stuff. And when the research came back, it said, no, this is way above. So we then was able to show the research showed that the 2 clever mums in the kitchen actually would have been completely failure. Eventually, we pushed this crazy animation through, and overnight, I'm not joking, sales doubled in that week. Literally doubled. We had people doing humorous parodies of the song. We had an enormous number of likes and people talking about it. Even got press coverage about how original it was and what interesting it was. And it proved that this was good. And we then were able to use that to a lot of other clients to say, look, doing something unusual is good. But the messages are all in it. It told you what it was. It didn't hide any of the facts. It was all about, good yogurt, how it was made. It was from Greece. But he just did it in such a quick way, people noticed it. And of course, sales just shot through the roof. And the retailers loved it as well, which is really important. People forget retailers want to see good ideas.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
we've talked a lot about work and career and the peaks and troughs of that. I'd love to know something outside of work that you're really proud of.
Yeah, well, being ADHD like you, I've got about 50 million things going on. What do I do outside of work? Well, sports-wise, I go rock climbing. I quite enjoy that. My older son's a rock climber. Used to be in the British climbing team, actually. So I enjoy that as a hobby. That's quite fun when you don't have interests. I play guitar, have since college days. I've been very much into experimental music scene. So I do still have a band I play in. And I actually almost every week go to these experimental music clubs like Schronk, which is down in Deptford, or some of the other ones, Vortex Jazz Club and stuff. So it's quite fun to go along and be very creative. Sometimes playing with these amazingly accomplished musicians, like proper musicians, I call them, and you just do the weird and wacky stuff. But it's quite fun when you're playing with it, and you can really be creative. We have a little studio out in Berkhamsted where my music partner and I go and write music every week. So we do that a lot. The biggest thing I probably do at the moment is I organise the Crouch End Festival, which is one of London's biggest community arts festivals. We've got about 60 venues, 200 performers, and I'm the artistic director of that. So I manage most of the events around the creativity stuff. So I'm organising all the live music events. I'm organising some very crazy events like Poets in a Phone Box, and so some other people do the more regular stuff. I organise all the wacky stuff, Art in the Park, there was Crazy Art in the Park project. So I do the more unusual stuff, and I just try and encourage all these artists and creative people to do crazy things. And sometimes I put them together and say, let's see what happens when you put them together. That's quite fun. So that's coming up in 2 weeks' time. And then I took over a 500-year-old tower in Hornsey village, which is just a tower, and it's like a 4.5 meter size room, and it'd been restored, but nobody did anything with it. So I took it over. So going to run as a venue. So I run as a venue. We have 3 or 4 things going on in there every week. And then I have a experimental music club called Offbeat, which is what we call Fringe Music Club. I do that every quarter. We invite lots of musicians to take a church over, put up massive screens, massive PA sound systems, set it all up, like a proper concert, and invite musicians to come along and play with each other. And amazing musicians usually come, and we just get them to improvise, and it's fantastic. And occasionally my kid, my 9-year-old, will go and play something as well, which is quite fun. He likes being on stage. And then besides that, I get involved with a tremendous amount of community projects. And I've got a lot of sideline issue projects as well. So yeah, I never be not busy.
I think what I could actually have asked instead was tell me your ADHD without telling me your ADHD.
Thank God. See, the one advantage is we only sleep 4 hours a night, so we have a few more hours in the day to do things. I went to bed at 4:30 last night and got up at 8. And, that's one of the, because when I was at school, I was diagnosed as hyperactive. And everyone was very jealous because hyperactive sounds really cool, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm hyperactive. Yeah. Now, of course, as my son's just been diagnosed as ADHD, he said, "What does ADHD mean?" I'm saying, I'm not going to use the language, which is, who creates this language? Attention deficit hyperactive disorder. No, 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 no. It's attention diversity, where our brains are in 5 places at once. Hyperactive dynamic, thank you very much, is a dynamic. Or as Dave Pinky says in Captain Underpants, hyperactive deliciousness, which I think is great. So one of my missions is I have a group called Dyversity Lab, which is a global collection of neurodiverse thinkers. And we're basically all people that sort of reach heights in our career. And we got together, and every now and again, we all get together to help some charity do something. So we use our ability to think differently to make a difference. What we also on is a crusade to change the language around things like neurodiversity. So take all the negative phrases out. I've even seen people use dyslexia dysfunctionality. Seriously? You look at autism, deficit in that word. You look at some of the others, there's a lot of deficit words and, all those kind of stuff. Who puts those words in? Because they're not us. Can those people who are doing it stop it, please? Because they're very prejudiced. They create unconscious bias. And so I've convinced the school now to stop using the old ADHD definition, now using the new one. And I think that's a really good, and a couple of other people picked up on it as well and said, no, why are we not using that? Because it's actually truer. We're not deficit. You and I know that it's not a deficit. It's just because our head's in another place. I'm sorry, teacher, you are boring. What's going on outside the window is better. But it's interesting because, talking about this surge of ADHD at the moment, which is completely wrong. It's actually called SAD, which is simulated attention deficit, which is created by too much time on tablets and phones and stuff. And so what happens is they're so overstimulated, their brains don't have any attention. They're not in 5 places like we are. They're in no place. And that's a very different condition as attention deficit than is what we are, which is attention diversity. That's why another reason I want the term to come in, because I think we need to recognize the damage that technology is doing to our kids is creating this deficit problem. And it's not ADHD. They just jump on the bandwagon because on TikTok, it's popular to say you're ADHD. They're not ADHD. It's almost them.
Love the impact that you're having in these conversations, in the work that you're doing, in the groups that you're running, and just the energy that you're putting into this space. And as someone who wholeheartedly agrees with you on let's remove all of that negative language, hats off to you and thank you. I think this is a really, really important thing to be doing. Sadly, we're coming to the end of our time. I have one final question for you, and it's the same final question that I ask every guest. And that is, are you, Chris, still awaiting approval?
Am I still waiting approval? Well, I guess if you're referring to the fact that, my parents saw me as the lowly one in the 3 and the black sheep of the family, I think there's a psychology that most of us achievers are actually seeking not to fail rather than achieving. We're often trying to seek to prove to our parents that we can do good. Hey, look, I'm a doctor. That's something. Will my dad be proud of it? Hopefully, yes. I've written books. Yes. I've achieved this, achieved that. And it's interesting, you compare my 2 brothers, my twin brother, my older brother, and you look at their biogs, it's about 1 page. I think the last biog I wrote was 17 pages. So there was a lot of, I've chaired things, done this, done that. And, I can fit as much in today as I can fit. I'll do it. So someone said you live 4 lives at once. And I do think that for a lot of people who are achievers, we are often trying to prove ourselves to those parents who told us what's wrong with you. And that's very common among those who are ADHD or dyslexic or even autistic, is that we were often criticized as kids. Now we tell parents not to do that. But in a way, it kind of works because it kind of made us try harder. It made us try to prove ourselves. For some, it doesn't work. It works the opposite way. So have I got final approval? I don't think I ever will. I think there's just something inside me that keeps me pushing to the next level. What can I change? What can I make better? What can I do? How can I make things more positive? I always got another idea up the sleeve, and I've got one that I'm working on at the moment, which is how can we, get more people to go to music venues? And it's one of those impulsive ideas I had in the afternoon, and by 2 hours later, I'd already arranging a meeting with Haringey Music Services. I already talked to various people. I'd already designed the logo. I'd written the document. It was about to launch the website, all in a couple of hours. But it's a great idea, and it could change how music goes in this country, how we get people into venues. So I never stop. Sorry, until I had my heart attack.
Well,
we hadn't really
I
die on
sincerely
screen yet.
No, yeah. I mean, you did say launch a campaign with a big PR stunt. That's not the kind of thing that I want to be doing here right now. So let's not do that. This is your opportunity. How can people get in touch with you? How can they find out what's going on with you? Where are you online?
Well, I'm on Facebook a lot, I have to say. Not so much Instagram, but you can certainly find me on LinkedIn under, I'll be the only one, it's Dr. Chris Arnold. I'm certainly around on Facebook a lot, certainly around the Crouch End area. I run 26 different Facebook groups. That's why I don't have time for Instagram. I've got a couple of Instagram accounts and a few of the others as well. But, it's sort of pop up in all sorts of places. And, I do a lot of talking now. You combine doing strategy. I love speaking. Public speaking is my favorite. I love going out and talking about neurodiversity. And in the last couple of months since Neurodiversity Week, I think I've done 22 different talks at companies, thankfully mostly paid as well, to actually talk about neurodiversity and getting people. And I have a talk that's called Thinking Differently About Neurodiversity. And it really is making you think differently. It takes all the negative shit out. It puts all the positive stuff in. It makes you see it in a positive light. And I think one of the most rewarding things, I had a girl contact me afterwards through LinkedIn. She said, that was great, really inspiring. I love it. It really made me feel good. But my previous employer had hired one of those typical HR companies that come in and talk about things, and lady would come in and she talked about, unconscious biasness, and all this kind of stuff. And so, which is very important, health and safety. And she came and did a talk about neurodiversity, and it was so negative. You and I have both seen that kind of stuff. If you put into ChatGPT and ask for the 10 traits of autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, 80% are negative. And this was probably near 100% negative. So at the end of the talk, she said to the woman, "Can I just ask you a question?" She said, "Yes. Are you neurodiverse?" She said, "Good God, no." And that summed up her whole attitude. So my talk couldn't be more opposite. And at the moment, I guess for me, my big change platform is getting people to think differently about neurodiversity. I'm very happy with what I've done in advertising, and I still enjoy it. And I love doing ideas, and I love surprising clients. I love flogging things. My dad did teach me one thing about advertising. He said, if you don't sell anything, it's no bloody good. So
I think that's the perfect line to end this on. Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good. Well, nice chatting to you, Adam.
Thanks for listening to Awaiting Approval. If you're a creative leader or stepping into a leadership position and want support that's honest, practical, and tailored to you, I'd love for you to come and join my Supercharged Creative Leaders Program. It's a 4-week course built around 8 pre-recorded modules, 4 live sessions with me and the rest of your cohort, a private Slack space for you to ask questions and go deeper together, plus ongoing access to my alumni community once you complete the course. Each cohort is capped at just 6 people, so you'll always get personal attention, real feedback, and space to grow. And if you want to tailor the journey further, you can book extra one-to-one sessions with me, and we can dig deeper into the challenges you're facing right now. I built this program based on everything I wish I'd known when I started leading creative teams. No fluff, no jargon, just the tools, frameworks, conversation, and clarity that will actually move you forward. Spots go quickly, so if this sounds like the right fit for you, go to growwithadamjennings.com to book your place on the next cohort. Previous attendees have gone on to win major pitches, land new roles, get promoted, and step into leadership with more clarity, confidence, and purpose. You can find out more and book your place on the next cohort at growwithadamjennings.com. I can't wait to start working with you. Awaiting Approval is a Cordial Fox production, hosted by Adam Jennings, produced by Adam Jennings and Jasmine Egner.